Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co host, Cameron McAllister. In this episode, we talk about the supposed fact that the peak trans movement is over. Is it? Because it seems to us that the underlying condition of hyper-individualism is still around and that it's not going anywhere anytime soon, but that there are some very real, hopeful signs that we may be trying to move past it. Stick around. This will be helpful to you as you think through some of these pervasive habits of mind and life, frankly, that have shaped all of us. As always, like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to support the work that we're doing and get behind us financially, you can do that by going to www.toltogether.com.
I think the best way to jump into this conversation is with a sentence something like, I don't believe that peak trans is real. And the reason that I'm phrasing it in that way is that there have been a number of articles, news stories, podcasts, the normal where people are chattering about things, statements of looking at a significant drop between 2022 and 2025 of the number of people who are identifying as non-binary. Some of that's been misconstrued to say that there's a drop in the
Mm-hmm.
rate of transgenderism or gender dysphoria. That's not exactly what the study was measuring. But in 2022, you had about 7%, I think, of certain collegiate populations saying that they were non binary, and that's now 4% in 2025. So maybe almost a 50% drop there. Some people are going to say it's because we've kind of hit peak of that as an ideology. Others are going to say, well, no, we're now just living in a time in which people who are non-binary are less, you know, confident to say those sorts of things out loud because they might feel like they're persecuted or punished in some way. Or you'll have other people say, no, that the transgender category has now swallowed up a lot of those who would previously have said they're non-binary, but now they've chosen a gender to live with as their, they fully transitioned one way or the other. So all of that to say, you can go Google around and find all sorts of interesting commentary on that. That's why I use the word peak trans. Sort of is like, is the gender politics, gender ideology, gender identity stuff fading away? And the reason that I'm saying no is because of this. And this is a distinction that needs to be made. And for those of you who have listened along for a while, it also makes a distinction in the way that thinking out loud engages with not just culture, but what we're shooting for is understand deep culture as Christians. And if you think for a second, Cameron, that we're looking at, let's talk about non-binary, transgender, gender dysphoria, pick your category, the very small sliver of a deeper cultural impulse, which is that I define reality and reality conforms to my wishes. Years ago, there was a joke or, comic Calvin and Hobbes, where Calvin tells his mom, I choose to reject your reality and insert my own. Uh, and it's kind of a chuckle line coming from Calvin, but there's a sense in which the reason that I don't see any rapid cultural changes here is because the I do it my way, I do what I want, I am the individual, I am the master of my own destiny. That is our cultural mantra. That's not liberal, it's not conservative, it's not left, right, up, like that is the world that we live in, is maximizing individual expression and defining reality, creating our own meaning. Um, all of that is alive and well. And so that's the deeper cultural issue that maybe some forms of gender dysphoria or transgenderism or non binary identification spring out of. But those are three categories of a much larger array of ideas and ideologies and practices that are alive and well in the hearts of every person, particularly in the West. And so I don't see a deep change happening in our cultural structures that make us think, oh, you know what? Maybe a deeper connection to nature and culture and religion and a more collective understanding of letting the community define who I am. I don't think we're trending in that direction anytime soon. So that's me. I've laid my cards on the table. I might be right, might be wrong, just throwing out that out there to take apart. But if we look at the deep cultural issues here, I don't see any big changes.
Yeah. If you look at some of our basic American stories, so many of them center on somebody born into a community And the whole drama involves them breaking away from that community and defining who they are, who they want to be. You can do this with, this works in Disney movies, of course. Usually you can even everything from a princess who has expectations surrounding her, who doesn't want to conform to those standards and wants to do
You
what
could
she
just let
wants
it
to do,
go.
no matter how culturally anachronistic. Yeah, there you go. Well said, Nathan. Another good cultural reference and another point for you on that one. It also works with Westerns. Although interestingly enough, this is a total sidebar, so won't bring it in here, but Western is one of those categories that was once wildly popular and really isn't anymore. And
Hmm.
that's really interesting. Not that you don't have the odd Western that comes out every now and then, but it doesn't have the level of cultural dominance that it had as a genre at one point. The
Louis
genre that most
L'Amour
dominates
could
right now is
and Zane
horror,
Grey
which
could
is
no longer sell thousands of Western novels. Is that what you're suggesting?
oh, yeah. I think so. Yeah, I don't think so. And I like Louis L'Amour, by the way. But anyway, so
Cultural change.
this runs deep, but it's not just our movies. I mean, this goes to the heart of people who have been born in the world shaped by the Enlightenment mindset. And the Enlightenment mindset, to a significant degree, obviously, this is an overgeneralization. If somebody's an academic, they're going to say, huh, which Enlightenment, Cameron? Well, I'm speaking in broad terms, not the radical Enlightenment, right? The common sense Enlightenment. We get it. You're very smart. Thank you. But just the idea that human beings are at the center of the universe, that we're rational men and women
Blank
who shape our
slates.
destiny. Blank slates, right. Now, it doesn't matter if you wouldn't put this down on paper. This is the default position for most of us. This is what you just if you don't think carefully through where you stand and work through where you stand, this is where you will drift into a position not unlike this. And so that type of rugged individualism, does it have a foothold in the church? Well, of course it does. Absolutely it does. So part of what you're saying, Nathan, this is where you and I are just no matter what, we're gonna be the killjoys. We're always gonna be the wet blankets. We're always gonna so somebody comes to us and says, good news. The trans movement is fading. It's over. Its reign of dominance is over. Thank God the nightmare is over. Well, in a sense, there's some truth to that, maybe. But Nathan and I would probably say, yeah, but the deeper you're describing the trans thing is a symptom of a much deeper underlying condition. And that underlying condition is a kind of hyper-individualism that is so deeply internalized by all of us, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. It's been with us for a long time. We've been developing it. Now, what it has different weird mutations and different pathologies and weird outworkings, and those express themselves differently, and they can get increasingly radical at times. But that hyper-individualism, it's not going anywhere. So all that to say, yes, Nathan, I'm with you. I think you're right.
Well, this
I
is our
didn't make
shortest
anything better.
episode ever. We just came to an agreement on something. So can we say for a second here though, or like, what are some of the ways in which I could be wrong? So let me argue against myself now. All right,
Yeah,
turn.
there you go. Be a
I've
Kierkegaard.
made my position. Cameron has agreed with me, so I feel like we're on fairly solid footing here. But are there cultural markers, Cameron, of so think of it like this. The thing of it is that hyper individualism always destroys culture because a culture is a way of life shared together or something generally in that or this is the way things are done around here.
Yep.
It's a collective statement. And when you hyper individualize, you can't form a culture out of that. And so you can have
Okay.
networks, but you can't have cultures. You can have groups, but you can't have community. It's a lonely category to find ourselves in a hyper individualized world. Where do you see are there actual changes or pushbacks happening that people are maybe starting to want their I, I'm going to have a hard
Mhm.
time arguing against myself because I think we all have always had that longing for a more
Yep.
communal local thing, but at the same time, the
Mhm.
efficiency and the freedom that comes from the individualistic alternative is always
Yep.
higher. So I don't know. Help.
Okay, I think yeah, I'll try to help here. I think a phrase that from our Lord is really helpful here. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So I think a lot more people want that, Nathan. I think a lot more, well, people are just intensely lonely. So two things. They're lonely, and let me use we language. We're lonely as a culture, and we feel starved for real meaning, intrinsic meaning. And I think on an instinctive and just common sense level, there's wide recognition that the rugged individualism or the hyper individualism isn't enough, and people are exhausted with it, and we need others. We need community. I mean, community is a buzzword right now, for heaven's sakes. We the local movements, these are buzzwords too, but they're also indications that people want want a deeper a shared sense of meaning, a shared story. So a number of years ago, Andrew Del Banco, English professor at Columbia University, brought out a really interesting book called The Real American Dream: A Meditation on Hope. And he's talking about this very thing. Now, this came out in 1999. So my goodness, have things escalated since then? Think of that meme. Well, that escalated quickly. Kind of that would be the response to that book. He wrote it in 3 parts. It's a short book, Harvard University Press. I would recommend it, by the way, guys. From now on, I'm done making apologies. I'm going to unapologetically recommend books. And it has some big words in it, and you'll be just fine. You should read it. It's short. It's great. But he has it in 3 movements: God, nation, self. And so he's looking now. He kind of a unique way of coming at culture. He argues for a culture, a way of life lived in common, yes, but culture also for him is a unifying story that binds us together. And so a coherent narrative that gives shape to our lives and makes sense of where we're at. We're in desperate need of that, by the way, right now.
Well,
So the
can I,
beginning chapter, yeah, go ahead.
well, I was going to say a good example of this, and then don't forget where you're going there with the outlay. But in Paul Kingsnorth's book Against the
No, it's
Machine,
already gone. Just kidding.
you remember that
Yeah.
story where he's in Indonesia and they're sitting around the campfire with all these people from different countries, and somebody says, "Hey, sing a
Play an
song from
English
your
song.
village." And so you have the Indonesians
Yeah,
and the
it's great.
Germans, and they're all singing a folk traditional what's the song of your village?
He played a
And they
Bob
say it to,
Dylan song, right?
yeah, like all the English people looked at each other like, we don't have a national, what song? And so they all sing it. But he was saying that he wasn't saying that jokingly. He was like, that is messed up that we don't have a traditional song. Like that is a sign of a brokenness of
Mhm.
community that we don't have a traditional song, or that we couldn't even look at each other and come up with something like, here's a song that we all know that, you know, symbolizes something
Now,
of
you know what he could have
our
done?
amazing grace.
Yeah, he's right. His his point is well taken. No, but he could have played an English drinking pub song, but he didn't know one because the point is he was out of touch with his because I
Right,
mean England
exactly.
and Ireland do have those songs, but and actually Bob Dylan's a fairly apt guy because Bob Dylan is a sort of troubadour drawing from a larger tradition. But your point is
But
really
the
well
the
taken
the
there. Yeah.
feeling that he takes away from that is one of homelessness. So when you were talking
Yeah.
about longing for a
And
story or longing for a collective way in which we
mhm.
see ourselves fitting into a communal narrative or a history or a future,
Yep.
homeless is a good phrase, I
Exactly.
think. Culturally
Homeless,
homeless.
nomadic. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, so the first chapter, God provides that coherent binding story. He's not arguing that remember Andrew Delbanco is a remember, you don't know who he is. He defines himself as a secular Jew. He's sympathetic to Christianity. He's a literature professor, so obviously Christianity nourished some of the texts he absolutely cherishes. But he says he's not arguing that America was a Christian nation. He's arguing that its Christian heritage played a major role in shaping the American imagination. And that's hard to argue
Mhm.
with. But then as that begins to lose coherence, what really begins to undermine that is the Civil War. And so I'm not going to make all of his arguments for him, but the Civil War was also in some ways a theological crisis. I'll recommend another book, The Civil War as a Theological Crisis by Mark Knoll. Very good, worth reading. But that begins to undermine the authority of God's word. And so then nation begins to coalesce as the story that binds us together. And then, it's America as this kind of sacred nation, this wonderful political experiment in freedom and liberty. And the key figure there is Abraham Lincoln. He becomes the sort of symbolic head of that story. But then when that begins to break down, and again, just in case you're interested, he argues that it's another war, no surprise. The key war that undermines that is the Vietnam War, which was catastrophic for so many different reasons, but also
Mhm.
culturally catastrophic and undermined trust in the government in a way that few things had until that point. But then comes his final section, which is where we're at now, which is self. Now the story gets narrowed, funneled all the way down to the level of the individual. And this is where we live now. We are all our own little authors. We are the authors of our lives, or the captains of our ships, pick your metaphor, and we define the world as we like it. And now we also have all this technology arrayed around us that helps us to customize our own vision of reality. So it's just digging us further and further in. But to your point, Nathan, the question that you asked me all the way at the beginning there, I think this whole experiment of self is getting it's we're at a level of exhaustion with it because it's
Mhm.
hollow, it's thin on meaning. We're not up to the task of creating our own meaning, like you said. And so people are suffering very seriously because of it. I do see some real hope here. I always see hope because I'm a Christian, but I do think post-COVID in particular, I think COVID played a very remarkable role in bringing people to a level of spiritual introspection that they hadn't been at for a while,
Mhm.
where they were asking some of those really hard questions. Why am I here? What's the point of all this? How do we live well? I mean, one of the key questions of our moment is, what does it mean to live well? Also, I want your opinion on this, Nathan, too. There's this AI hysteria on the one hand, but it very much looks to me like people are not really drinking the Kool-Aid on AI. I mean, there'll always be the tech bros who are out there, singing its praises, but ushering on the singularity. But most regular people I'm seeing are fed up with it, and they're just not buying it, and they don't see it as this amazing
Well,
salvation that it's being
so
marketed as.
so one of my actually, I went down this rabbit hole last night. Um, if you go look at a so just type in YouTube, like, popular AI songs. You know the best part about an AI song on YouTube is? The comment section. People are hilarious. I mean,
I bet.
just and so there's almost like a value of which we've taken this thing, we've put it on a pedestal, and now that we put it on this pedestal, we can all mock it relentlessly. And so I think there's a whole lot. If you just look at how much has changed in the AI world in the last 3 years, and then you do that another 3 years, it's hard to say what will come out of that. But at this point, yeah, I think very much there. Um, we do find some common humanity by mocking the things that aren't human. Um, as much fun as it is to watch, Stephen Hawkins do a backflip in a wheelchair, it's not really fundamentally changing
Yeah.
our economy or our relationships. But that being said, this idea of the self and where I'm looking for glimmers of hope of people having a more expansive view than just themselves. And I'm just thinking about this. If anybody knows of any research on this, please send us an email at info@toltogether.com. I would love to see some sociological study on like the formation of clubs and groups and cliques within high schools right now. Because I wonder, how do you is there enough, has everybody truly atomized into their own individualistic perspective, or is it a are there still groups that form in meaningful ways of, when we were in high school, you could have had the goths and the rednecks and the emos and the band kids and the soccer, like there was a you kind of found your tribe.
Yeah.
And I don't know if tribes are formed in the same way socially. Um, but I can sense, even though like my oldest child is soon to be 13, I can sense in her a longing to be part of a culture. Like there is something in us that wants to be part of something bigger, to have a group, and she's not
Mhm.
finding that through the school, which I'm fine with. But um, there does seem to be an innate human desire in there to like we were crafted to
Yeah.
live in a meaning that's bigger than the one we construct.
I remember feeling that so deeply because when I was 14, we uprooted, and 14 is not a great age anyway. And then we moved from Austria to the United States, to the Bible Belt South. I went from a school of 126 kids, grades 1 through 12, to a high school of nearly 4,000 kids. And I remember just it was a driving question at first for me. Where are my people? Who are my people? What am I supposed to
Mm.
be? I remember that was a big one. I mean, who am I? Now, in some ways, that's also just a teenager's question. Who am I? What am I?
Yeah, well,
Who do I
let
want to
me push
be?
it. Yeah, but is it? I mean, it is a teenager question, but is it only a teenager question? That's what I think is more interesting, and I
Well,
think it's not.
now it's our culture's now it's our culture's
Mhm.
question. Yes, and it's a picture of a state of a culture in confusion. But yeah, I also remember another very interesting incident, and at the time, I was confused by the strong response that from my father. Now, all these years later, I get it. 9/11 had just happened. One of the defining events of our childhoods, certainly, right? And
Mhm.
it changed the world. I remember in the days after 9/11. So two big things that happened in my childhood that I remember very vividly. One was Columbine. We had just moved to America, and then the other was 9/11. So in the wake of 9/11, my dad said something to the effect of, "If I were a young man," no, he said, no, this was much more confrontational. He said, "If I were your age," pointing at me, "I think I'd enlist." Well, I wasn't. It couldn't have been my age because I was too young. But if I were a young man, I think I'd enlist. There are some things worth dying for. And instinctively, instantly, without even a thought, I said, I wouldn't. And he was quite angry.
Mhm.
And there was this huge, but I couldn't articulate it at the time. But there was a chasm fixed between the two of us. And what that chasm was a radical form of individualism that I had
Mhm.
imbibed by osmosis as a young guy growing up in America. Because to me, the notion that I would enlist in any cause that would jeopardize my life, for any cause, what was just unimaginable to me at the time. And that's a
Mhm.
that's a sign of where we were at as a culture. I couldn't imagine. Now I wanted to be a part of a group, but the notion that I would give my life for some grand cause
You
was
wanted to be part of the group on
inconceivable
your
to me, and
terms.
that's a exactly, and that's a picture of how far we'd come. Think about my dad growing up in post-war Britain, in Scotland.
Mhm.
He was shaped by visions of the Second World War, the films that he loved, like The Guns of
Well,
the
and his parents'
Navarone, The Battle of
generations. Yeah.
Britain, and his parents' generations. His dad had been a navigator in the Second World War. You know, that was something that was completely foreign to me. It wasn't part of my imaginative landscape, and frankly, I was just, you know, a bratty, selfish, typical American teenager. So now, I mean, of course, from the standpoint of where I am now, I can look back on that. Now I have I have some reservations about warfare that I've come to in recent, in years as I've grown and, developed theologically. But I can look back on that, and I can see there's that gulf fixed between us, and I can
Hmm.
feel that hyper individualism. So I've known it from the inside out. I fight a battle against that in my own life all the time. It's a present tense battle for me, Nathan. So that's why I'm sympathetic here, because this is so deeply ingrained in our culture, and that's also why I'm at pain sometimes when something like the trans movement comes up or whatever it is. I want to say, as Christians, we need to take our share of ownership here as well, not to self-flagellate or to virtue signal, but to recognize that this hyper individualism that so defines our culture, that we are a part of it in our own ways as well.
And the beauty of the proposed beauty of it is if you don't like it, you can change. So if you don't like this podcast, you can go listen to another one. If you don't like your church, you can go to a different one. If you don't like your spouse, you can get a different one. If you don't like your job, you can get a different one. If you don't like the radio station, turn to another one. If you don't like that brand of pickles, get another one. If you don't like that brand of car tires,
And then
get
we're
I mean,
surprised that we're lonely. Yeah, yeah. But yes, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that's a recipe for chronic loneliness that you just
Yeah, but
outlined there, but it's
I know
also
we're agreeing, but I'm
the
trying to say, how
consumer
do we not
approach to culture.
how do we not sit
Yeah.
here and wallow in a puddle of like, well, yeah, this is just the way it is. Like we're all kind of doomed to be lonely because we're the only ones who are right in our own little worlds. There has to be a
Because human beings Oh, well, like you just said, Nathan, because human beings can change. We are transformable, and that is the wonder of human
ah,
life,
but we're
and
transformable into
yeah,
a an external
for
standard.
better or for worse. We can transform, we can also mutate. So, for better or for worse, we're spiritual creatures, but we can change, and again, for better or for worse. So, this is why it's so important. We always hammer on about the fact that you need to go to church, but you do, not just because it's not just because it's a biblical command, but also because we need to have our hearts set right. We need to be able to see the world clearly,
You
and
need to be
we
committed to
can't see the
people who
world clearly.
inconvenience you.
That's it. We can't see the world clearly unless we are banding together with fellow believers who inconvenience you, yes, and who are invasive. And also, worshiping the Lord together in spirit and in truth and sharpening one another as iron sharpens iron, all those biblical metaphors. But we need it to see things clearly. Otherwise, there's a sense that, oh, this is just our fate. This is our destiny. There's no escape. We can't get away from this. It's so pervasive. The answer is it is so pervasive, and you can't do it on your own. That's true. But with God's help, his word and his people, you can. You really can.
So that seems to me to be the glimmer that I do see in this is I think there I mean markedly is an increase in interest in church. Now, some of that is political, political revolution interest, but I think a lot of it is spiritual hunger and desire to say, um, I'm ready to participate in something in a vision that's bigger than one that I can generate. And so I don't want to sound too pessimistic because I do anecdotally see these shifts and changes. Um, but the point of this podcast is to point out that some of the things that we see happening, whether it be to your political right or left or up or down or sideways or good or bad, sometimes these they aren't changes. They're just different forms of the same manifestation of a hyper individualistic way of trying to cast reality in our own image. And so celebrate and rebel against that, but at the same time, don't overly narrowly select and say, well, these forms of self definition are out of bounds, but these forms of self definition are okay. Well, if self definition in of itself has some inherent theological, like, let's deal with it at the root of it, maybe not always at the symptom of it. And that's not to say that you can't critique and make suggestions about symptoms and manifestations, what's helpful and what's not. I'm not saying all of that. I'm just saying every time I maybe this is the best summary of my feeling on this, Cameron, is I like to tell people since my middle name is
Mm.
David, I have the conflicting prophet and king all in one name, Nathan and David, right? You know, the story of how they go together. But so there's that sense in which anytime that I see something somewhere else and I'm about to point that out or morally condemn it, I get this little, smack in the back of my head that says, Ada Haish, you're that man. You do this, you do the so David's about to critique somebody for doing the exact same thing that he did, and the prophet Nathan points it out to him. And so let's have the integrity and ask the Lord for conviction in our own lives of when we see something that is other than what we would desire to see in the life of somebody else or in culture, to remove the plank from our own eye first and to say, what are the ways in which I'm participating in a vision of hyper individualism while I'm critiquing that vision of or version of hyper individualism and let the Lord work on us first. And it doesn't say, don't get the speck out of your neighbor's eye. It just says, get the plank out of yours first. And so it is not a call to quietism or to sit back or to do nothing and not make any moral judgments or, suggestions that are helpful, but it's to say, tread carefully lest you too fall, because we are all porous in the boundaries that we set, and it's permeable. And we're likely to, I think Cameron gave a beautiful testimony there of like, hey, I swallowed all of this by osmosis because if you're not thinking about it, this is the default position. So, for my part, Cameron, this is more of a challenge and a reminder to myself and a reflection that hopefully is stimulating and serves as a bit of a um, prebiotic to other people listening to this podcast who might be tempted to wonder in the ways in which we have in the past.
Well, thanks for thinking along with us on this topic of one of the things we try to do here is we try to the best of our abilities look at underlying conditions rather than symptoms. And we've tried to model that in this podcast by focusing on the hyper-individualism that is so pervasive. And we hope it's been helpful to you. Thanks, as always, for listening in. And in case you missed it somehow in all of this, you are listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.